Yeah. Okay, so maybe let's get started. Welcome everybody to the session. This is the the trust principle adoption session, and I'm very grateful for Bob Dunn step in because I was originally was not able to join because the restrictions. And so we're going to co-present the introduction part of it, and then we will follow by Hervé present another use case that let's see how to make trust principle practical, and and then we will open the floor. We hope to have a discussion um, in the end. So that's kind of the plan for the session. And so maybe Bobby, go to the next slide about the RDA principles.
Yes, and first of all, we'd like to welcome all of you for joining us today. And for those of you who are new to the Research Data Alliance, we have 6 guiding principles, including openness, consensus, harmonization. It's community driven, and we're inviting both profits and nonprofits, and we're completely technology neutral, and of course we're also for inclusivity. And so please, if you haven't joined the RDA yet, you can join the RDA at the link below. And then without further ado, we'll move along.
Okay, I want to add to what Bob just said. Actually the trust principles was developed under RDA, and those principles are very helpful. And I think it was started with like open discussion for 3 plenaries that what does the trust principle means for the community. And later on there is probably like almost 200 people like comment on the principles. And then there is 19 co-authors, and from all disciplines and from all trustworthy data repository certification standards, and from all the stakeholders, ranging from funding agencies, publishers, and repository operators. So that's kind of the the process, and then the trust principle is the result of that. So I think there's we can say probably the trust is an example of how effective those principles from RDA can stimulate the the data ecosystem. And so the this working group, I just gave a very brief introduction, is that so the trust principle was published 2020, and then there is wide adoption. I will mention a little bit later. And there was 3 co-chairs, um, myself and Mickey, Linda, unfortunately could not be here, and the same as Meredith Goins. They're all working very hard to have leading the group to find out how the trust principle are useful to the community. And then Bridget Walker is the liaison from the RDA, is gave a lot of help on connecting with the various group, and as well as a new Guru Raj, and and help us connect with the technical communities. And so this working group is really after the trust principles was introduced to the community, and then to uh, try to clarify some the relationship between the trust principles and other certification process and matrix, because there is a lot of activities going around, and people may not just get a clear understanding, from the acronyms. And for example, the trust principle is really at aspirational level to give people motivation and also a demonstration that the trustworthy of the data repository are important. Uh, but it's not a standard. It's not a new thing. It's just, I think it's more as a message to advocate that uh, all activities like certifications and metrics and attributes and desirable characteristics, all this are important. And then to unite the trustworthy uh, the repository trustworthy community that could really kind of work together to let people know, not just the people we're familiar with, like the repository community, but even the scientists are not in our domain, or the founders are not familiar with the technical aspect of the trustworthiness of the repository. They also know the important. So that's the purpose of the working group. Bobby, you want to talk about the trust principles?
Yes, thank you very much, Dawai. And so for those who aren't very familiar with the trust principles, they stand for transparency, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and technology. And it's actually a paper that was published in Scientific Data in 2020. And then, as Delwai had said, we had worked a lot on that with so many different people within the context of the RDA at least two different plenaries. And I believe these were in-person plenaries, if you
Yeah,
remember those, but they were all in person. And um, uh, just trying to remember where they were. I think one of them might have been in Philadelphia. I'm not
yeah,
sure.
yeah,
Oh, it
yeah,
was, okay. Yeah, and so I think the seed for all that might have started in Botswana. uh, uh, where we initially started talking about those. And then the idea grew, and we had various drafts of the paper where many people offered their suggestions for improvement. And then uh, finally, we had to make the paper a bit succinct, which I think in the long run worked out quite well. So it's not really a long read, but if you're not familiar with the trust principles, I would suggest certainly reading the paper. And as Dawei said, there are like 19 authors on it, including probably a bunch of us who are here today. Um, and so, just as a recap of what each of the letters of trust stand for transparency, we want to be open and transparent about the different services that we provide in a repository, as well as the data products that are being offered by the repository. And we also want to be transparent about our processes, how we're providing the data, and in terms of the quality of the data, any reviews that are taking place, etc. For responsibility, we want to ensure the authenticity and the integrity of the various holdings, and also for the reliability and persistence of its services. So in that sense, we want to make sure that we do take responsibility as a repository for the services that we're offering and for the sustainability of those services, which I'll get onto in a little bit. But we want to make sure that uh, we're managing the repository in such a way that it will provide the services not only today but tomorrow and so on for the community, and that we're being responsive also to the data producers who kindly allow us to share their data, and to the user community who support us by visiting the repository and using the data and the services that we offer. In
Mm,
terms of the user focus, we want to ensure that the data management norms and expectations of the users are met. And so what we mean by that is the repository should be working very closely with the user community to understand what their needs are and how the data repository might be able to meet those needs. And such focus isn't just a one-time thing. We need to ensure on an ongoing basis that we're continuing to meet the needs of the community, and that we change, that is, modify and revise the capabilities of the repository so that we can continue to meet the expectations of the user community as well. In terms of sustainability, we certainly want to preserve those data holdings for the long term. And, this is one of the bigger challenges, to be quite frank, of a data repository. What the data repository really needs to do is to find ways in which those data can continue to be made available to the user community over time. And that might mean, if the repository is unable to continue to provide those services, that it finds ways in which the data and the services can continue to be provided to the community. We're actually seeing lots of activities related to sustainability amongst a variety of repositories as we speak. And then lastly, in terms of the technology, the repository wants to provide the infrastructure and the capabilities to support secure, persistent, and reliable services. So, we not only need to keep the lights on, so to speak, keep the web servers and services all running, but we need to develop the kinds of services and tools that the users can actually use to access the data and use the data for the different types of analysis. So
mm,
one of the things that I think that is important about the trust principles is that it's not each one of these individually. That is, it's not just transparency, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and technology. It's all of these things together, and the repository is working to ensure that all these things are being done. And the beauty of the trust principles, I think, is that it's not one of these certification efforts. It's where the repository does some introspection. They look at themselves and they say, "Hey, how can we do better? How can we be more transparent and responsible? How can we support our users better and ensure the sustainability of the services, and also leverage technology in order to do that?" Back to you,
okay.
Dawai.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I think so if people have questions, feel free to put into the chat and then we can answer after a short presentation. And I should say the we see the sustained interest of the trust principle, as you can see from the bar chart on the left, and is just keep increasing from the paper published. Uh, and also the citation ranking is also I think is moving up, and I think the last year was 98 uh, percentage, and now it's 99, and uh, there is probably now around like a 360 citations since like the paper published, and that is pretty much like 2 or 3 citations per month, and so we definitely want uh, to leverage this kind of recognition from the community, and within the working group we have a student from Meredith's group, and to analyze uh, what all these papers talk about trust principles, how do they use it. Definitely, we can see the diversity of it is not just the established repository thinking about these principles. In a sense, this is common sense for them, but also the people who are not uh, a repository operators. They're also thinking about the repository uh, principle. Like this is essentially the trust principle is like it's operational best practice if you think about it. And so that's I think is the also the original motivation to develop trust principle is like is for all repository, even the ones that has not start being built yet. So that's the things we see. Um, about the next slide. And so so there was there were 3 areas we're thinking to collaborate in order to leverage the trust principles. And one is that like through publication and report or other kind of funding announcement. And then there is a lot of publication I mentioned already. And then there was some uh, the reports or funding announcement already start to um, mention the trustworthiness, the concept, and the things what I think still need a little bit more work, which is kind of the dotted line instead of the solid line, like publication, is that so there is a lot of parallel um, activities or kind of related activities that is not easy to distinguish uh, if you're not kind of know all of them. So so that's what the working group trying to work on. That for example, the FAIR principles is like people mention a lot, and the FAIR principles uh, to us is really on uh, data that how to make data uh, machine readable, like usable, right? I think that's what the findability, accessibility, and interoperability is about. Uh, but in order to have fair data, you need an operation, you need the people, and to make data fair and make them long term. So the fair principle and trust principle are operating at different levels. And the same thing for similar things for care principles is really as the social aspect of it. So like once you have the data has value, you wanted that benefit all communities. So that's kind of the things what the working group trying to work on, and to make sure that that we are all on the same page and talk about the same things. Bob, can you just back up one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And then the third uh point is that there is a lot of established effort already, and like the certification standard, and I see a lot of my former Cartesio colleagues are here, and there is other standards like ISO and Nestor seal, and those effort are the uh, the the real good examples how people use trust principles that to increase the trustworthiness of the operation of their interest. And then there is other effort. It's not necessarily certification, which is kind of is a high standard for repository to be uh, like have a pretty well established operation. But there are some other assessments like the Digital Preservation Coalition have the rapid assessment model. Those things are are out there already, and people are working on this with their own community. And so so what the working group is trying to work with all of them and to come up with the a message that is catered to each of the communities. Bobby can go to the next slide. And so with that, I think there is a couple of goals that the working group trying to achieve. One is to understand what are the hindrances of the trust adoptions. Like um, we we know people like to read and like to cite trust principles, but but uh, well, I think we want to see more how to make the trust as an actionable practice in their operations. And then and so then what how the trust principles are connected to specific implementations. And and I think the things we observe is that people are, I think, all agree with those principles, but sometimes the paper and or people talk about it is not speak to the language of that particular community. For example, the biomedical community may not, you know, uh, understand what how a lot of principles are kind of used to the social science communities. So how to use the different communities language to interpret the trust principle, I think that's the something is need to be done. And then and how can we improve the understandability and the usability of the trust principles? So so then to accomplish all those goals, and we think it will be important to clarify the relationship between the trust and care and trust and fair and all other activities I mentioned in the previous slide. Next slide. So so this is a couple of a working group deliverables is to create, administrate, and analyze a survey on the principles to standards uh, like on principle and the standard hesitancy and report findings. So working group has already exist for probably uh, a, a more than 1 year, and we did administrate a survey, and there is probably about 100 repositories responded. So we're in the process to analyze the data, and hopefully maybe next plenary we can have a session to share the analysis. And so that's is already in process. And then the second delivery is to collect uh, and analyze and report on case studies. And so we have engaged with a lot of groups, which is I would talk a little bit more about that, and then let them to talk about um, how they use trust principles. And then these use cases cover the the cohort I mentioned before. Like, there were some standards and there were some other repositories. So I'll talk about it a little bit like more in the next slide. And then creating a mapping to, like, say, how trust principle map to those uh, different type of implementations. And then that's will be, I think, after we're collecting all the use cases, we kind of start to do the those mapping. And there is already some mapping has been done, and I think Bob will talk a little bit about that, but that's more as a iterative process. And then we're gonna, trying to develop some the test guidelines and just kind of test it out to see how they work. And and then we'll in the process actually also create a wiki page on trust, and to just to reach out, all audience that we can think of. Next slide. So this is the use cases that we have already done. And each of the use cases actually have the developers of like those principles or standards presented at the working group, and the videos is online in the working group webpage. And I really encourage you, if you have not done it yet, to view those videos. It's very thoughtful discussions, and I learned a lot. Even I know some of the contents pretty well. Um, so the the use cases like care principles and the fair sharing working group, and how the registry uh, that implement trust principles, or some of them are, it's not just like, say, how trust principle is useful, but also how the trust principle has not addressed the need they're thinking of. So I think that's a way to kind of improve what the trust principle is about. And the another working group from RDA, that the data repository attribute working group, they also present how they thinking about trust principles. And then the all three major standards for digital repository certification, they all presented uh, at the working group, and also including the DPC, the rapid assessment model. And then geoscience, they already have a tool created to map, different uh, attributes to trust. I think Bob will talk a little bit about that. I mentioned about the survey. So there is still the community we're trying to reach out, like the generalist repository. We talk with that community, but doesn't have a presentation, like, the really kind of in an organized way. So we're still doing that. And if any of you are in that community and want to work with us, please do reach out. And of course, we want to also know, if you have other suggestions like we haven't think of. We are also happy to hear that in the next couple of months. Next slide.
Okay, so uh, now I had mentioned the Group on Earth Observations, or GEO, which it's an international organization, and it involves several countries and various initiatives. and related efforts, and more recently, they've even been involving the commercial sector on this. So it's a very large initiative that's been going on for 20 years now. And one of the working groups of the group on Earth observations is the Data and Knowledge Working Group that originally was called the Data Working Group, but it evolved over time to become the Data and Knowledge Working Group. And one of the efforts of that working group was to develop a case study for the trust principles. And so as part of that effort, one of the things that we did is we mapped between the trust principles and the data management principles, the geo data management principles. And so you can see here, we've got transparency, responsibility, user focus, sustainability, and technology on the left side. And then on the right side, we have the geo data management principles, or metadata, providing online access, encoding and documentation, as well as traceability. And then, of course, we have to have quality control, data preservation, and data and metadata verification. And then we also have data review and reprocessing and persistent and resolvable identifiers. These are the data management principles that Geo developed, and these have been around for a decade as well. And uh, looking at the trust principles, for instance, transparency, you can see that we've mapped that, of course, to discovery, and also to documentation, traceability, and data preservation. That is, we want to be transparent about how we're preserving the data as well. Likewise, we've mapped responsibility to discovery, data documentation, traceability, quality control, data preservation, and data and metadata verification. And you can see here we've mapped the user focus, of course, to discovery, um, online access, data encoding, documentation, data review and reprocessing, and persistent and resolvable identifiers. Sustainability is mapped to data preservation, data and metadata verification, and then persistent and resolvable identifiers. And then technology is quite widely mapped because it's involved with discovery, of course, encoding, data documentation, verification, as well as the persistent and resolvable identifiers. And so we're continuing to look at how the trust principles can be mapped to other initiatives that are going on. And this is an example of an effort that is continuing. Back to you, Dawai. Dawai, are you still
Yeah,
there?
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Bob. And so we're still I think have time to incorporate new ideas, and we welcome you to join us. And this is a couple of links that you can see what has been working on. And if you have time to join us on the Zoom meeting, and please feel free to join us. And if you have any questions or suggestions, they can also email uh, the trust at the RDA-group.org. So this is a kind of introduction and update of the working group. And I want to pause a little bit to see if there's any comments or questions before we get to Hervé to talk about another use case.
I see there are items in the chat, but because I'm displaying the slides, I can't see the chat. Might there be a question within the chat?
I have not seen the question in the chat, but I think Lisa posted a link to the note, the Clapper note. There's a lot of good contents already there, and feel free to add what you heard. Um, so maybe Hervé, I think uh, we can get to you and you can start the presentation. So Hervé, and Bob, I didn't have a chance to introduce to all of you. So maybe I think if you can introduce yourself a little bit, and maybe I start with me, and I'm working at National Institute of Health, and um, I'm co-chair for this working group, and I want to emphasize like the opinion or the comments that I express is myself is not.
Yahweh, did we lose you?
Yeah, I think we lost away at
Oh,
the.
okay. Well, I'll just continue from there until we get Yahweh back. Um, I'm Bob Downs, and I work at the Center for Integrated Earth System Information, which we refer to as CEASON at Columbia University. And with that, why don't we go ahead and move on to Hervé? Hervé, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I guess you can see my slides, so that should all be all right.
Okay.
Yeah, Dare and everyone invited me along to talk about an emerging project which has got some close relationships to the issues that are covered by the trust principles. So what I'll do is I'll sort of outline what's happening with the project and how it kind of connects now and in the future into some of the trust principles work. I'm Hervé Lors. I'm working, as I said, on the Fidelis project. I'm also from the UK Data Archive, which is the lead partner in the UK Data Service, based at the University of Essex. So the Fidelis project is establishing a European network of trustworthy digital repositories. I won't go into a great deal of detail into the background here, but we began relatively recently on the 1st of January. And one of the drivers for the funding for this was a paper called Towards a European Network of Fair Enabling Trustworthy Digital Repositories. And that, along with some work from the European Open Science Cloud's long-term data preservation task force, led into a funding opportunity to try and bring together some initially European, but hopefully global repositories in a kind of to provide both common practice, but also a common voice for those repositories. So they'll be looking at a self-sustaining network after the end of this sort of 3-year project period. We have multiple partners in the consortium, many of whom you'll recognize from here, from the RDA, from the trust principles themselves, and from the Core Trust Seal group. And over the course of the project, they're looking to set up and develop and operate a European network of trustworthy repositories, supporting the development and the growth of the TDRs within the EOSC ecosystem, fostering harmonization and interoperability across repositories to enable an EOSC federation of TDRs, and strengthening the upskilling of repositories and expansion of the network through an active training and support program. Now, obviously, this has got a very specific initial focus to do with building the European Open Science Cloud itself, but I think everyone involved knows that this only really works if we've got a truly global perspective on the data that we need to look after. So the work that I'll be talking about particularly today is under Pillar 3. This will influence multiple other activities and other projects, but it's really looking at building a common understanding of trustworthy digital repositories and a harmonized matrix of repository capabilities and characteristics under work package 5 of this. So this transparent, trustworthy repository attributes matrix, the TTRAM, provides a structure and a reference for the Fidelis and the Eden projects, more on that in a little while, and for the emerging Fidelis network over time. We'll go over the details of this, but it uses 29 activities and functions that are relatively constant across all repositories. It integrates how these are influenced by a variety of repository variables. We're initially looking at repository type and service, and I'll explain why. And identifies what information should be made, first of the trust keywords here, transparent. So we need to understand the practices undertaken by the repository, as well as interactions between the activities and functions and those variables. And in some contexts, these factors will influence trust and trustworthiness in the research infrastructure landscape. It's important to note that some of these activities and functions will not always influence trustworthiness specifically, but will still be highly relevant to the potential members of the TDR network. So the matrix is a tool. It's there to support the project, the network, and the wider EOS stakeholders in collecting this information in a logical and reusable way, understanding the wide variety of types and practices across repositories, sharing structured information for consultation and use, and then designing and implementing a functional network of mutual support and aligned practice. So to do this, the first variables we've selected are the levels of retention, curation, and preservation being offered by any given repository. And secondly, these commonly used types of repository that influence the scope of the collections and the organizations that care for them. These levels of retention, curation, and preservation will be familiar to those of you that have seen the work done by Core Trust Seal. This differentiation of different intervention points in the life cycle and different levels of service was driven initially by the wider group of people who were seeking to get certification via the Core Trust Seal. So there was a need to go out and work out just how we thought about the levels of curation in a bit more detail. This went through multiple levels of community feedback and is now a position paper from the Core Trust Seal. It was also included and then recommended by the Long-Term Data Preservation Task Force from the EOSC as a reference point here. And you'll see that this ranges from retention-only repositories through to those that set some kind of compliance criteria at the point of deposit, but not necessarily anything else, to this initial curation repositories that will take some curation actions upon the point of deposit to make sure that data and metadata reach some defined criteria. And finally, the active preservation repositories, which are the initial focus of most of the formal TDR standards, where there's long-term responsibility for ensuring that the data and metadata can be understood and rendered as required by the designated community for reuse. Now, obviously, an ability to drive down through the different repositories and potential members to consider these factors is essential and important, and obviously in different repository types may offer a different stack of these levels of retention, curation, and preservation. The next set of variables is the repository types and the organizational collection scope. So we'll use the commonly referred to repository types: institutional, regional, national, and international, generalist, disciplinary, domain, and specialist all come up at different times. But what these types do is they influence the scope of a repository's organizational mission and their collections. And we need to look into this in a little bit more detail because we need a degree of granularity when we think about what the exact data and metadata is that we need to have transparent around repository practice. So this could influence digital object types and the content that's accepted for deposit, curation, preservation, and access. It could impact the range of users served or the range of depositors served. And obviously it will influence the necessary skills and expertise within the repository. And that's clearly a major factor for understanding what needs to go into a specialist repository. So each of these variables that we've selected influence the repository activities and functions and the related information which should be made transparent. And understanding them and how they interact provides the foundation for more of a common vision and for the exploration of additional relevant variables including but not limited to the trust principles. You've heard Dawe mention here as well the fair and care principles, which will be included, but there are also a range of other metadata standards. I think DROG was mentioned earlier, and other criteria, for instance, the Coalition of Open Access Repositories or the Elixir Core Data Resources, which set some kind of information expectation or practice expectation on different repositories. There's a wide range. So obviously all of these variables relate to transparency. That's one of our key focuses. And those initial variables I've just described address user focus in a big way. And some later work that we'll be doing on extended variables will support sustainability and technology. So we picked 29 activities and functions. It's a big list. They won't all apply to everyone, but they're divided into digital object management, organizational infrastructure, technology, and security. These will be familiar to anyone who knows the TDR standards themselves. It's a common way of dividing up and grouping these activities. It's a superset. It's drawn from a range of existing criteria, guidelines, requirements, and standards, some of which I've just mentioned. So the idea here is that the matrix supports cooperation and alignment. So it will complement and engage with those working to develop more specific and granular criteria. It's very much not intended to dilute or replace them. This is very much a lingua franca, a crosswalk, a superset from what's out there at the moment to provide a manageable reference point for the other more detailed pieces of work that are happening out there. It's a big old list. Those of you familiar with the Core Trust Seal will see that there's a strong element of alignment with the Core Trust Seal. But a number of other standards and criteria have indicated that we should include a number of other activities and functions. Those green arrows in the center there show the traditional repository lifecycle end to end. It maps comfortably into things like the OAIS reference model and to the DCC lifecycle model. One of the reference points was the DPC rapid assessment model, which Dawe mentioned earlier. So on the left there, you can see that each has an identifier, belongs to a specific group, and then we list the activity function at a high level, and each of those is supported by a very brief high-level description. And then in our work to initially map this out via existing standards and to existing repositories, we'll be looking to complete information about how each of these activities and functions is influenced by the level of retention, curation, and preservation, by the collection scope, disciplinary coverage, organizational scope, institutional or national. And that'll allow us to drill down from these initial variables into something a little bit more explicit, which will guide what should be made transparent. So here you can see the next column, information which could be made transparent. We're happy to have a very open prose response to a lot of this from anyone so that we can collect the maximum number of opinions possible from, as people have said, repositories at a widely different range of maturity. So it's very important that we get that we don't exclude people through, as Dawe has also said, the particular language used or anything else. It's a very, very open setup. But also we'll be preparing a template in a much more granular and specific way to looking at references around information artifacts. So these might be internal to the organization, policies and procedures, or external guidance, criteria, legislation, etc. Specific repository characteristics. So the standardized repository information, which could be items from the Data Repository Attributes Working Group, metadata in the re3 Data Repository Registry, all those levels of retention, curation, and preservation offered. And finally, object characteristics. We know that information about a specific digital object that results from a repository activity function is very important here. So the activities and functions might include a statement about rights or the list of the licenses in place, but we really need to know which specific license is being used for a specific object. In the case of storage and integrity, we might have good integrity planning for a specific object. We really do need to know the checksum. You know, it's a question of making sure that we drill down from those activities and functions to the results at any individual object level. And these are characteristics. Some of them are already represented by existing metadata standards and schemas. Some of them won't be. So we're looking at how we map those out as well. So this would be the more complicated version of the template that we'd ask people to fill in, down to include that information artifact. So that could improve a provenance metadata policy, contact information for support, mission statements, or at the object level, specific levels of care in place from those levels of curation and preservation we mentioned earlier. And one of the drivers behind this is that trust is not binary, and it's not a static outcome of a single one-size-fits-all assessment. The context needs to be meaningfully defined so that we can understand the objects, actors, roles, and the expected levels of service. These in turn make it clear that an assessment of trustworthiness needs to be based on reliable and transparent information. So we've addressed a wide range of sources here, including the past and current EOS task forces and the Horizon Europe Annotated Grants Agreement, which provides a perspective on essential criteria for trust. We'll be aligning with our sister project Eden as this goes on, including a data and process framework for long-term preservation, discipline-specific requirements, validation and future use, and looking at long-term access and preservation tools, which will also align with the RDA work on technical repository service providers. So those last two will clearly map strongly into the technology work on TRUST. So what now? Well, planning is very much in progress for this. We've only been around for 4 months. We're looking at internal feedback and to finalize the structure of this matrix. We'll look at initial population and alignment within the projects. But this will be a maintainable artifact evolving through the lifetime of the network. And there will be ongoing alignment with existing standards, guidelines, criteria, and metadata. And one of our key reference points will be those TRUST use cases that were spoken about before. So we'll have an initial template, which is presented as a blank template with simple and detailed versions and supported with draft populated examples. And those initial inputs will enable an iterative approach to cooperating with the repositories and the criteria authors themselves to reach a shared perspective that enables mutual support and trustworthiness within that network. There's the Eden website up there. If you scroll down to the bottom of that homepage, you can sign up for the newsletter and you will receive additional information about these further steps. This website is shared between the two sister projects, Eden and Fidelis. So there'll be a revised version of the matrix and guidance presented at a webinar in June. We'll be very happy to see you there. A stable version of the matrix structure shared with for feedback and via a virtual workshop in September. A matrix report released in December, and then from there population expansion and sharing will continue beyond this, including hopefully with the cooperation of members of the TRUST working group. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Hervé. And we're glad to see you came back, Dawai.
Yeah, sorry, like their technology cut me off, but I am happy to hear what Hervé talk about.
Yeah, that was great. And why don't we start it out with any questions for Hervé that people might have? I know I have a question, but others have a burning question. We could have them go first. I didn't see any in the chat. So why don't I just go ahead and ask my question to Hervé. So Hervé, that was really great, and it's exciting to see the new project taking off here. And I'm just wondering, is there going to be like a self-assessment capability or some other kind of assessment for repositories to determine their maturity and also how they might be able to do this in conjunction with the community in any way?
So that's a really good point, Bob. So I'll work backwards from that. There will definitely be work to look at how these different factors imply different tiers of maturity. But as you know from your work, a lot of this is context dependent. Yeah, we know that we want this to be as flexible as possible. We want to allow people to pick and mix from the available resources that are there to see what counts for them, to target specific areas for maturity over time. It's not solely about it's certainly not solely about assessment. It's about mutual understanding for assistance through a network. Now, that doesn't mean that different parties won't be able to look at these different activities and functions, these different variables, and say, well, we need this particular piece of information as evidence for an assessment for a particular set of circumstances. But the project itself is explicitly not there to create yet another certification mechanism. So we're looking at people being able to say, when they look at a list of activities or functions or a particular variable, to self-describe. That looks like me. And from there, to be able to drill down into the information to say, well, if that looks like me, where are my peers? Where's the information related to that that would help me learn about myself, learn about my peers, and improve? Yeah. So there will, and we know how this works, there will always be a temptation to rush to judgment, but that will not be the role of the project. The role of the project will be there to support a variety of different perspectives and try and kind of meld them together in a way that means that we know that repositories are expected to share a huge amount of information and meet a huge amount of criteria. And if we can contribute to making that a little bit easier and a little bit more practical, then I think we'll have succeeded.
Yeah, that's great. If I might follow up, I'm just wondering, so if I'm, say, representing a repository or more than one repository, and then we see ourselves for one of the repositories in a particular way within your overall model, then would we be looking for other repositories who are in the same shape and how they are addressing their opportunities for improvement, or exactly how would that work with in terms of collaborating with the community?
Again, a really good question. So the governance base, we're 4 months in. The governance model is very much underdeveloped, and how the membership would look like and work to make this both sustainable and useful is very much under development as well. I mean, if I can use my own organization as an example, one of the problems with we are not going to avoid traditional typologies. Yeah. We know that there are 50 definitions of preservation with 50 different perspectives. So I guess one of the questions is how you drill down just far enough without overcomplicating things to reach the level of understanding that you need about yourself and your peers. Yeah. So my organization, we're renewing our Core Trust Seal certification at the moment, and we consider ourselves to be a trustworthy digital repository. Thank you very much. But we also got a self-deposit system. So we fall into a different category. We're a national repository. We're a disciplinary repository, but we're also part of the UK Data Service, which undertakes a range of other activities above and beyond what the Core Trust Seal is interested in. So the Core Trust Seal would assume that access happens rather than certify it, whereas access practices are an important topic. Similarly, I think the Core Trust Seal wouldn't define a specific need for support or training, but some of the other criteria that are out there are very clear that support and training should be a part of their member repositories. So even within like my one example, it's fairly easy to drill down to say these headline variables need to be explored a little bit more so that you can understand me and what a special different flower I am from everyone else. But then I can go from there to work out which peers and partners might be people who are similar enough to me to be worth, I mean, hopefully, if it's an effective network, me to learn from them, but also to identify where they can learn from us. And this needs to be a dialogue as well, I think.
Surely, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I don't want to monopolize the question, so why don't we open it up for additional questions that people have for Hervé before we have an open discussion?
Hooray, I think, sorry, kind of missed the most part of your presentation. I'm interested in knowing, like, when you think the trust process, like, and along with your metrics, what what do you think are like obvious and useful, and what are the things you think is kind of hard to explain, like in terms of, like that which principles that this particular attributes may map to?
I suppose the most obvious one, Dara, is the fact that this whole piece is looking at what we need for transparency. And that raises quite a significant issue, which is that a lot of the work around the European Open Science Cloud, a lot of the work around the different umbrella organizations and the different expectations of different parts of research infrastructure is increasingly saying repositories should make this information available. This metadata should be available about the repository. You should be able to publicly state the following information. It should be structured, moving from prose into machine actionable. You should share all of this additional information about each digital object that you have for a massive variety of use cases. And one of the topics that we're going to have to address around that is that transparency does cost. Yeah, moving things from people's heads to formal documentation costs money. Moving it from formal documentation into metadata costs money. Tidying it up and making it public and opening an API so it can be read by humans or adopted by machines. All of these things are costs to repositories, which may have multiple different benefits across the research infrastructure, but they are additional costs. Yeah. So the starting point is to talk about what could or should be made transparent. Then you need to justify why it should be made transparent. And then obviously we need to persuade the funders that they should invest heavily in us repositories to make sure we can make this transparent over time and maintain that information. Because it's not a low cost, no cost situation. And that will be part of the voice of it. So transparency first, I would have said. If we can drill down to the first set of variables, then they're all about the levels of service and the type of repository. Yeah. Both of those equate to user focus. Does the user know what they're going to get from a given repository? Yeah. And do they know if they can use a given repository? If I just need retention, then I don't need a long-term preservation repository. Yeah. But if a repository has got a completely national focus, there's no point me trying to deposit in it if I'm from a different country. So this is the next level of drilling down to say, what information would need to be transparent so I could select the level of service and the type of repository I'd want. And we know that there are repository registries out there who are working on this actively at the moment, but the underlying metadata isn't there to support, a researcher making a simple query saying, given these parameters, where can I put my data so that it is looked after in a way that I depend upon? So that's the user focus piece. Yeah. And the level of responsibility and the user focus piece are, I think, strongly entwined. I think later we'll see the sustainability piece. I've already said that transparency costs money, but all of the rest of this costs money as well. We know that project funding is a risk to sustainability over time, for instance. We don't have sustainable funding for things like the registries that we all increasingly depend on. So this whole wider federation of connected organizations through the EOSC will hopefully allow us to demonstrate that we can save money and have economies of scale by spreading some of these roles around. But at the same time, for my repository, if you ask me to depend on a file format registry or a repository registry, then that's a risk, yeah, as well. So we're looking for that balance. So I think all those will come together, and then I think incrementally, especially through the Eden project, which is looking at preservation tools, we'll be able to plug in for these different activities and functions and these different variables some of the tools that are out there that can be provided to repositories. And what I'd like to see, as I would like to see a world where we've got a more standardized way so that I can compare different products and software providers, so I can easily identify which of them meet my needs as a repository and which thing can then help me meet the needs of my users. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for explaining that.
So I don't see another question for you in the chat, Hervé, but I was just wondering, or I wanted to comment, I guess, on the point of sustainability. You pointed out that it's certainly going to cost. And, you know, if we look into the future, uh, the cost would be ongoing. So that would certainly be an ongoing challenge. And I'm wondering, in terms of your project, whether you anticipate, in order to address that, whether your project would have to either get more funding, even just to address that or to assist with that aspect of it, or whether there might be other resources that your project could point to help facilitate sustainability.
I guess there's three things there, Bob. One is, yeah, there's going to have to be some kind of membership fee if this network is going to work. They'll have to look at sustainability and work out how that's going to happen. Network governance and membership is an ongoing discussion. So that's really significant. Within the course of the project and then moving beyond the project, that will be a transition that's in planning at the moment. Should that work effectively, one of the ideas behind this is that the project will be a promoter of practices which mean that we can take a common approach and might be an interesting target for a commercial or a non-commercial provider of services to help meet those needs. So it's expressing our needs very clearly so that they can be met by others. And those needs for the third level includes having a common voice with the funders. Yeah. And I think the primary aspect there would be to look at how we do this within the European Open Science Cloud. Now, I think my caveat on that and my personal concern on that would be that that funders almost inevitably want something, you know, hot, new, and sexy to throw money at on a fairly regular basis. And despite many years of effort, I haven't managed to categorize metadata as quite as hot, new, and sexy as I'd like. But it is a massive dependency. But project models don't really support the funding of granular metadata work across, you know, 1,000 or 25,000 repositories in the same way as they can fund, you know, 10 organizations doing a very specific task over a 3-year period. So I think that's a really open question that we all need to try and address. How do you get metadata uplift and granular improvement across a very wide range of repositories and maintain that over a long period of time? And I think it's a significant issue because a lot of the other things that people want to do with research infrastructures, including improving findability, accessibility, interoperability, reusability, or machine actionability or AI, all of these much more high profile and shiny things all depend on a base layer of vastly improved metadata for current digital objects and past digital objects. So I think that's a real thorny issue. And I haven't got the answer yet, but hopefully the network will help have that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are great points. Yeah, I think sustainability is going to be an ongoing challenge, and that you know, as repositories, we're going to have to probably find a way to tie in the sustainability of the existing data with those, like you said, the shiny new things like AI. So, you know, if we're going to try to get funding for a project for AI, for example, then it might be necessary to also get funding to sustain the underlying data
Mm-hmm.
that AI would be leveraging in order to fulfill its goals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I can add on to a little bit more on the sustainability part of it. I think actually founders that would like something that is sustainable because there is a lot of policy implementations like like the NIH data sharing, data management plan those are need, not just like, a kind of small repository may go away, very soon. So I think that is probably the selling point. It's not necessarily like sexy, but I think that a infrastructure that can be proved and trusted to last for a long time. I think that is a selling point. But I think, Hervé, you brought up a very good point. Like, like say, how much does it cost? I think that's is I think the key question. Um, and I feel like uh, if the community, like the digital repository community, can come up with something like, to emphasize the unique value that, like for data preservation for long term and maintain the good quality can be reused, but also maybe from the technology perspective that can reduce the redundancy and increase the efficiency. Like, this is like the best part of the community effort that is, make it long term, but also like cost effective. That type of message um, may be attractive to, to get the sustainable funding to help.
Yes, I, I think we're solving that problem is a little bit like some of the challenges that the core trust seal has faced. Yeah. So people turn around and say, well, why don't you tell us exactly what we should do to meet this particular requirement of the core trust seal? Yeah. What exact information do I need to provide in exactly what state for my specific and unique type of repository? And the core trust seal board has been very clear that they're there to reflect the current common expectations of the community, not to act as the criteria police. That takes a wider group and a wider investment for that to happen. And the core trust seal has been pretty active in being very open and straightforward about where some of those challenges lie.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, if you sit there and say, well, today I need a preservation policy, you then have to drill down and say, well, what should that preservation policy contain? What should it cover? So the curation and preservation levels maybe cover some of that. But then you turn around and say, well, that's not machine actionable. I need a re3 data record that takes those curation and preservation levels and gets you to pick from each of them for a given repository. Which levels of service do you offer? And then somebody will inevitably turn around and say, but for this particular object, how is it being cared for and how long for? So this kind of stuff cascades down in a level of detail and a level of investment over time. The missing ingredient is understanding the context and reaching some kind of community consensus on where the minima are. Yeah. Where should I be aiming for if I'm looking after sensitive data? Yeah. Where should I be aiming for if I'm a generic, one of the gray repositories which will accept anything? How does the disciplinary versus generic repository, how do they align in their practices over time so that they're still both contributing to a kind of a bigger picture of data interoperability? So you need to work out how these groups will come together. And it's not easy for us all to agree on any particular thing, but that is the essential level that we need to reach. Yeah, we need to make some concrete statements about what the minimal expectations are. Now, as I said, the Fidelis project isn't there to make the judgments, but it could be there to help cooperate about who the authority bodies are for a particular set of circumstances and a particular set of contexts, to say that in this context, we need X. Yeah, that might be the European Open Science Cloud saying, well, if you want to be a candidate trustworthy repository for us holding sensitive data, we see these as the minimum set of criteria. Because we're all great at having the conversations, but drawing a line is difficult, because drawing a line means that some people end up on one side of that line and some people end up on the other. But operationally, that's going to have to happen.
So any other question, comments? So maybe I have another topic. Actually, Mary, do you want to add something?
Yeah, so thanks for the discussion. Very useful for me also. I'm also working in Fidelis with Hervé. I just wanted to mention that the project will provide mentoring and training programs for repositories, and the project will also run the network during the project duration, so a little bit less than 3 years now. And we will welcome provisional members to join already this year. So there will be an announcement soon. So just yeah, join the email list.
Okay, great.
Regarding the membership, Marie, I'm wondering, is that international or just in Europe or other countries going to be able to join as well?
Well, the project is EU funded, so our focus is very much in Europe, but we are not closing any doors. So,
Oh.
yeah. But at the moment, we are really targeting the European repositories because of the funding.
Surely, yes. Well, it would be great if we could see something in other continents and countries as well, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, but you've got to remember as well, Bob, that like a lot of this stuff is, all of these project funded outputs and resources will have to follow the usual rules we have to follow, which is making these open and transparent as
Yes.
well. Yeah. So this is all about all of these outputs and all this information needs to be made transparent. If you want to have a common authority for minimum criteria for social science data, then it's unlikely to be hugely useful to say, and this is the common authority for European social science data. Yeah, there needs to be a global perspective and a global understanding. I mean, we're already talking to each other. We're at the RDA, for goodness sake, so they can't stop us.
Yes, excellent point.
Yeah. So so Hervé, is that any like plan a thoughts that for Fidelis, like I think you mentioned that like there is a 4 month period, and after that, will that be there was some outcome can leading to like to see how much funding is needed that to sustain the community, or is it more as a kind of get a consensus and like move things forward?
Yeah, I mean, like, how much does it cost? Great question. We will find out, I hope, in a tiered way. What's the minimum cost of? I mean, running a contact list, running a contact database, and a group of people, and a small series of meetings has already got quite a significant core cost. Yeah, so we need to make that worthwhile. The more services you offer, the more it's going to cost. So I'm hoping there will be practical tiers from minimum viable up to, if we get this successful, then we can do all this stuff. I'm hoping that it can demonstrate its usefulness through cooperation with existing umbrella organizations, existing criteria bodies, and everyone else. That's where a lot of this would come from too. But it does depend on those level of services. Yeah, I think we need to be quite imaginative about this. It's not there to replace any of the existing assessment bodies. It's not there to replace any of the existing membership organizations. So there is a delicate balance between how you become a good member of that society, I suppose, a good and useful member of that society. Yeah. But it's a real opportunity. It is a real opportunity, and it's an opportunity to get our voices heard initially in a very large, like a research infrastructure and a very large funding opportunity where we'll be then speaking up to people at policy levels who hopefully will be having international conversations. And we all know that having those international conversations and those global conversations is increasingly important.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I have another question, I think, for the entire room or the speakers and also feel free to chime in. I think we all know like there is kind of different function for the generalist repositories and domain repositories, and there is a sense of tension, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Like the generated repository is scalable, can do the data archive at quickly and at relatively low cost. But the main repository can add rich metadata that can be easily reusable and have high quality. But they really kind of serve different purposes, right? I think that's kind of the user focus part. Some just want to get data somewhere like quick and instead of losing it, and some more want more reusability. So so like how to have a balance of different kind of repositories and through the transparency and addressing like the evolved user need that they can have maybe a collaborative or maybe healthy portfolio of repositories. So how people think about that? Like say maybe one type of repository is not necessarily sufficient. Probably we need like more of that. But how like the trust can be used as a way to have a kind of vibrant ecosystem of repositories that address the need.
I'm wondering if, well, we certainly see that there are different funding models between the domain repositories and the generalist repositories. And it might be that as right now we're seeing a lot of domain repositories struggling to ensure their sustainability. And I think really this has been an ongoing challenge for the domain repositories. I can't speak so much about the funding of the generalist repositories. I've been more involved with the domain repositories, but perhaps it's time for the domain repositories to evolve and even learn from the generalist repositories on how they might be able to perhaps enhance their existing funding models so that the domain repositories can improve their potential for sustainability in the long run.
Mm.
I think that's a really good point. But we know that there's a lot of stuff not getting deposited anywhere. So if we can find it, get it deposited, slap a persistent identifier on it, that's a huge start. And then if we identify something as of particular value and importance, which might lose out because it's not in a domain repository, then we can look at the custody transfers to make sure it's looked after in the right place. And if something only needs to be retained, then it can exist somewhere else. I think it's a question of bringing all of the data into the fold to make it visible and addressable, and so that we can then kind of work this ecosystem to its maximum advantage. And yes, I think that should include maybe saving some tech costs where the domain repository shouldn't be spending them, but making sure we're spending a little bit more on that data expertise where it's needed.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear perspectives from the generalist repositories as well. And seeing that the generalist repositories do seem to be at least thriving at the moment, it would be good if we could see some opportunities for learning from the generalist repositories, because I think right now there are a lot of domain repositories that are they're really working in the near term in terms of their funding, and we've got to be able to extend that up a bit, at least partially.
Yeah, any of the audience coming from the generalist repository community? Okay. So I think we almost to the end of the session. Um, any additional questions, or comments, or concerns about the trust principle that people have in mind?
Sorry, I don't want to monopolize the conversation, but I don't see any other hands raised. So I'm just wondering regarding the working group itself, how it is going to be moving forward in the for the rest of its duration, and what we might look forward to seeing.
Yeah, I think there will be use cases continue to publish, and then I think working group will start to um, extract the commonalities of the challenges and also the best practices um, to use trust principles to help people. And I was thinking maybe we'll start with some like white papers at least, then get the more input, and hopefully there will be some useful guidance derived from almost like a year and a half activities. And I think so Lisa may know the time. I think it would be like the October and November timeframe will be the end of the working group. Um, but yeah,
October.
October. Okay.
So just around the P25, so the next plenary.
Okay. So I did not see any more hands raised up, and I want to close by really thanking all the speakers, Bob, and stepping up with the organizing the session, and Hervé present, and also all the participation. And I want to especially thank the Tiger Group, Lisa and Ryan, really supporting the working group. It's very essential support. We kind of appreciate that, and hopefully you take a note and join the working group, and it's open to everybody. And feel free to reach out to us.
Well, thank you very much, Dawei and Hervé, Marie, and Lise, and also to Meredith and Mickey, who weren't able to be here today.
Yep.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.